Hello and welcome back to What's Millie Making, where I'm Millie and this is a space where I talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. Today's video is Knitting Podcast episode 13, the big one, 3, and it is an episode with a lot of finished objects because I did a soft finish with February. I say soft because I didn't go into the month with these plans explicitly, but it just turned out that I ended up being focused on finishing up a lot of the lingering whips on my needles. So without further ado, let's just jump into the finished objects. So we'll put in the disclaimer that none of these finished objects are blocked and a lot of them have unwoven in ends. And that's because I've been meaning to record this video for like 2 weeks and I keep telling myself I can't block it because then it'll be wet for the podcast. But trust me, they will all be blocked after I finish recording this. And 3 of the projects are gift knits, so you won't be seeing them in future episodes after they've had their ends woven in and are blocked and whatever, but I'm sure I'll post about them on Instagram and TikTok, so if you want to see them truly finished, you can follow me or check my page out over there. And then the 2 that are for me, I'll also post about them elsewhere, because I already have like in my drafts on Instagram one of those like before and after blocking videos, but I'll also try to wear them in future episodes over here. Yeah, so I have 3 finished sweaters, so let's start with those. My first finished sweater is my Cardigan number 9 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. This was, I think, either my Christmas Eve or my Christmas Day cast on. One of those 2 days. And I finished it last month in February. This is my second time knitting this pattern. If you saw my most worn sweaters of 2024 video, you may remember that the Cardigan number 9 made it into that video despite me despite the fact that I finished knitting it like halfway through the year. I got so much wear of this through the fall and winter, my previous version in gray, and I know I'm going to wear this version in dark brown a ton as well. I basically knitted to pattern. I don't really think I made any adjustments. I really like the neckband on this sweater. So you work some double knitting before you work the collar, and it's a detail I've started noticing in some ready-to-wear sweaters, and I think it just firms up the collar, because one thing I don't love in a lot of hand knit sweaters, or specifically hand knit cardigans, the collar can be kind of floppy and I don't love that look. I feel like adding in those few rows of double knitting really give the collar a more polished finish. And in the pattern there is some mistakes in the way that the double knitting is written, but if you have, I didn't notice the mistake, or maybe I did notice the mistake the first time around, but it's just one of those things where I'm not really reading the instructions. Like, it will tell you to do double knitting and then it will write out the instructions for how to do the double knitting, but because I already know how to do double knitting, I don't read those instructions, I just do the double knitting. But if you do want to knit this pattern and you're unfamiliar with double knitting, you can just look it up, or if you go on people's project pages on Ravelry and you sort by most helpful, I think like the first 1 or 2 project pages, they explicitly state out what the mistakes are and how to correct them. But yes, aside from that, this was knit exactly to pattern. It is looking quite boxy and bulky, and I think that's because of my yarn choice, and that is the yarns that I knit this in. I knit it with Manchelopis, which is an unspun wool from Wooldreamers, held with a strand of Drops Kid Silk Mohair. So I think this is my, okay, I'm gonna take off my ring because I'm afraid it's going to snag the sweater. As I was saying, this is my second time knitting with Manchelopis. I think the first time I used it just as a contrast color in a shawl. So this is my first big project knitting with it. So it comes in large plaits and it comes double stranded. You can separate the strands, but to hit gauge for this sweater, I just knit it double stranded, and I think it's categorized as either Aran or bulky weight, and I think that is pretty true. One of the things I really like about unspun wool is you can knit it at a variety of gauges, but if you are holding this one double stranded, I really don't think I would go anything tighter than a worsted weight gauge. And I think I'm unsure how I feel about holding it single stranded, because it is quite a bit thinner than Knitwear, in my opinion, and more prone to tearing apart from my knitting experience. Actually, the first plate of this that I was knitting with, I was really concerned that I had like bugs or something, because this plate was torn in so many different spots. Like, I don't know if I accidentally put my scissors into it or something, because I didn't find any bugs. I didn't find any bug casings or eggs or anything like that. Thank God. I don't know what I would do if I did. But I keep my yarn separated in plastic bags. So when I first started knitting with that first plate, I just put that entire Ziploc bag in the chest freezer for like a week. But I think it was fine because I didn't find any other tears or ripping in any of the other plates that I used. I think I used a little less than 4 plates. The exact yardage is on my Ravelry project page, but there was just something off with that first plate because there were so many tears. It was just constantly tearing, and I've worked with quite a lot of unspun wool, so I didn't know what I was doing wrong, that it was constantly breaking or I was finding breaks. But besides for that first plate, every other subsequent plate was completely fine. And like I said, I didn't find any other evidence of bugs. I didn't find bugs, and I assume if there was bugs in that first plate, since all of my plates were stored together, I would have found the same issues in those further plates. So yeah, I don't really know what was happening. Maybe that first plate was from a different dye lot and it didn't get spun correctly or whatever, but that was an issue I did have. But overall, I would knit with Manchelopis again. I really love that it comes from the sheep that make Manchego cheese. So I don't know if I'm confusing Wooldreamers with Retrosario Rosa Pomar. I know Retrosario Rosa Pomar is Portuguese and Wooldreamers is Spanish. I don't know if the Manchego sheep wool would otherwise go to waste or not, because I know like sometimes Retrosario Rosa Pomar says like, oh, this is from native sheep to Portugal and the wool would otherwise go to waste. So I'm not sure around all that with this wool, but I just love that it comes from the sheep that makes Manchego cheese. I think that's really cool. And they are constantly adding new colors. Like they have a gorgeous like deep burgundy color, I think, and they have a brighter blue color that has totally caught my eye, and I would love to try knitting those in the future. I just think that if I am using Manchelopis, I will definitely only be knitting like worsted, Aran, bulky weight patterns, versus the Knitwear I think is more versatile in the sense that the single strand tends to be thicker. Theirs is also kind of inconsistent because they use different sheep breeds and different blends for every single colorway. So there is also a variety in the thickness of their yarns. But I think in general, a single strand of Knitwear is bulkier than a single strand of the Manchelopis. So the Knitwear I think I could knit at a sport weight gauge, but I can also hold it with a mohair and knit it with an Aran weight gauge, whereas because I don't think I would enjoy knitting the Manchelopis single stranded, I don't have as much variability, it doesn't have as many options. And I would love to make a video later this year or like a series or whatever. I'm not sure on the format, but I'd love to review and compare a bunch of different unspun wools, because I have knit with a decent amount of Knitwear and I do have other unspun wools in stash, but I always just reach for the Knitwear. But I know there's multiple different unspun wools out there, and I get, whenever I talk about unspun wool, I feel like I get questions about it. So I would like to do that. So I'll be reviewing and comparing the Manchelopis, Knitwear, the Hillesvåg unspun, and I've never actually knit with the Plutolopi, the Icelandic unspun wool, because whenever I've touched it, I feel like it's so rustic. But also, in my years of knitting, I feel like my tolerance for rustic wool just continues to grow, and I find myself favoring them more and more. So maybe I will try that again this year. So that's 4 of them. If you have any other ones that you think I should review and compare, please do share. I know that there's like a smaller Italian brand, I think, that came out with an unspun wool, La Viandole, and I think there's a Canadian brand that does an unspun wool. I can't buy any of those in store, so I would have to order them online, and I really haven't seen that many people talking about them. But if you're interested in hearing more about those, if you want me to review and compare them to the unspun wools I just mentioned, do share. And then I also held the Manchelopis with a strand of the Drops Kid Silk Lace, yeah. Kid Mohair? Kid Silk, Kid Silk Lace sounds right. It's basically your standard Kid Silk Mohair blend. I think it's like 70-something% mohair and 20-something% silk. I will say it is my least favorite mohair that I've tried. I think the dye lots are very inconsistent, and also it's very inconsistent from one color to another. For instance, the dark brown color that I used in this is actually quite soft. I quite enjoyed it. However, I have some white in this mohair and it's so prickly and itchy, and I was not a fan. And then I think in the last episode I was talking about how I was running out of the Drops Kid Silk Mohair, but because this dye lot is like 3 years old, I wasn't sure how different it would be from the current dye lot. And there actually is a store all the way up in northern New Jersey. It's like more than an hour away from me, I think, that does sell the Drops Kid Silk Mohair, and they had a color in stock. So I ended up going up there to see how it looks in comparison to the dye lot that I had. And if I haven't deleted the picture off my camera roll, I will insert it on the screen somewhere, but they look like completely different colors. The dye lot that I used in this sweater is like a very true dark chocolatey brown. It's quite a warm color, versus the dye lot that was available in the store that was probably milled, I'm guessing, in 2024 is much darker and more of a blackish brown. Like, they look like two completely different colors, so I didn't end up purchasing it. And I finished this with the Kelbourne Woolens Harmony, which was a acquisition in my last video, and I actually knit something up with it, but I don't even remember. It was basically one of the sleeves, or both of the sleeves, I think, that I was running out of the Drops Kid Silk Mohair, so I started helically knitting in the Kelbourne Woolens mohair, and I literally can't see a difference. Like, I don't know where I added it in, and I'm fairly certain all of the ribbing was done with the Kelbourne Woolens mohair, and it just blends in seamlessly. I do think that is one of the benefits of using the Manchelopis. So in general, I think unspun wool is similar kind of to Surrey alpaca in the fact that it really mutes whatever yarn that you're holding with it. So it's much stronger than whatever you're holding it with. And because the Manchelopis is double-stranded, I think you have a lot more leeway in blending together different dye lots or different yarn colors, which is nice to know. And I foresee myself maybe making some scrappy projects in the future, taking advantage of that fact. But yeah, those are my thoughts on my cardigan number 9 and the yarns that I used in it. I did knit the button band and I knit buttonholes, but I haven't found the perfect buttons for it. I think I want to use like dark tortoise shell buttons, but I haven't found any. I looked at Joann's, Rip Joann's. I looked at Michael's. I looked at my local quilting store, which has a decent button selection, but I just didn't find anything that I loved. Or I think maybe I found some, but they didn't have enough for the cardigan, so I'm going to have to go to my local yarn stores at some point to get buttons for this cardigan. Okay, that is finished sweater / finished object number 1. I forgot to include the finished cost of the item, and I didn't write it in my notes, so hence why I'm coming in later, why the light is a little bit different, but I will put the project cost on the screen somewhere. For this one, it is a little bit lower because I bought the Manchelopis on sale for 40% off at one of my local yarn stores, and then the Drops Kid Silk Mohair I also bought on sale at Wool Warehouse a few years ago, so this project ended up being pretty affordable. The only additional cost will be the buttons. Every subsequent cost that I will be sharing later through this video will also be me in this separate lighting because I forgot to mention the cost until later on. Finished object number 2 is one that was not even cast on last time, and it was using the Kelbourne Woolens Harmony that is used in this cardigan. And I think I talked about it as a potential plan in the last video. Okay, wait, I'm actually remembering. I talked about it as a plan in my last knitting podcast, but if you watched my video about Petite knit dupes, then I did show it as a baby little cast on, and it is now a finished object. How beautiful does this look? I'm just absolutely obsessed with this sweater. So this is the Celeste sweater by Petite Knit. It has been heavily modified, so let's get into that. This is a circular yoke construction sweater that you knit from the top down, but I did make a lot of changes to it. So first of all, it starts off where you cast on the neckline, you knit the ribbing, and then you go into the colorwork and the body of the sweater. I generally prefer not to do that for circular yoke and raglan sweaters because I find over time the weight of the sweater just tends to drag out the neckline because you don't have a seam there. So what I did is instead I skipped the neckline and I just cast on with the number of stitches after the first increase. So in the pattern, you cast on the ribbing and then you work a set of increases before you start the stockinette portion of the sweater, or as you're starting the stockinette portion of the sweater. So I just started off with the stitch count after the increases. And then I don't know how well you can see from this far away. I will insert some close-ups, but I knit this in all mohair. I held a variety of different mohairs and I held them all double-stranded. And my gauge was a little bit off. So after I finished the colorwork is when I first decided to measure my gauge. Don't ask me why. I just did it. And I realized my gauge is a lot tighter, but it actually ended up working out fine because even though it was tighter, like it still fit me fine in the shoulders and it gave me more room to make a change. So when it comes to circular yoke sweaters, I feel like they never fit just the way I like. They're either too tight around the shoulders and then, I don't know, it gives me like a mushroomy look, which I don't love. Or if they're too loose, they ended up having really deep yokes and then they give more of the batwing look, which is not what I'm going for, like a dolman sleeve. That's not the vibe that I'm looking for. However, this does not do that because after I finished the color work, I realized I didn't have the yoke depth that I needed. So I ended up adding in some raglan increases, and I got this idea from the Twinkle sweater by Midori Hirose, which I knit a few years ago for my mom. That one also has a circular yoke with colorwork, and then after the colorwork is done, they add in a few raglan stitches, and I just think it gives a much better shape to the sweater. Like I get a lot more mobility in my arms without the whole of the sweater lifting. Obviously the sweater still lifts because it's all attached, but it's not as bad as if it's a pure circular yoke sweater. So that was, I guess, modification number 2. Modification number 3 is something I'm just doing in all my circular yoke and raglan sweaters from now on because I love the final result. Instead of picking up stitches for the underarm, I just cast them on and you are left with a hole. However, when you cast on, I'm not going to pull out the yarn right now because it's tucked in nicely. You leave a long piece of string or yarn when you cast on, and then afterwards you just seam it together. You seam your cast on stitches to the stitches on the body and you're left with a really nice and clean seam without any holes, because that's like another one of my beefs with raglan and circular yoke sweaters. I love that. Actually, I don't really mind picking up stitches, so I don't mind on like a drop shoulder or whatever when you have to pick stitches up. That doesn't bother me, but I know that's a big pro for a lot of people for raglan and circular yoke sweaters, that you don't have to pick up stitches except for the underarm. And it always bothers me how this is a contiguous sleeve sweater, but I don't think this one has holes. It always bothers me how in circular yoke sweaters, a lot of times, no matter how much you tug or you decrease stitches, I feel like I'm always left with some sort of tiny little hole in the underarm, and then afterwards I have to like zhuzh or pull the stitches or try to weave them together, and it just never comes out as clean as I would like it to be. But I made this modification on all 3 of the sweaters that I knit for my family for Christmas, and I love the finished result. So going forward, I'm just going to make that modification on any on any circular or raglan sweater that I knit. And I'm just waiting to block it before I seam it. So what was that? That was modification number 3. Modification number 4. Oh, and that again also worked out because my gauge was too tight, so I was able to add some depth to the yoke and then also add additional stitches so it would fit my bust circumference. The next modification I did, so for the sleeves, I basically completely ignored the instructions because my stitch counts were so different. So I just knit the sleeves with some regular decreases, and then when it came to do the ribbing, I did really like the look of the long ribbing on the sweater. I did some rapid decreases and then knit the long ribbing, and that really cinched it in. So I have a very, very slight like bubble sleeve, which I don't mind. And then I did a little contrast color bind off. But I was asking people, do you think I should keep the pink? Like, is it too long? Should I stick with the brown? And something people suggested that I really liked was to keep the pink but make it shorter. My problem with that is that because I'm using 2 strands of lace weight, I just wasn't sure how sturdy that would be. So this is the pink, and I did a sewn bind off. Then on the other sleeve, I tried out my idea and I really liked how it worked out. So I did the bind off and then I folded it down in half. So I get this nice pink contrast, and it's a little bit thicker, and I don't know, I really like this detail. I think it looks really cute. That was that. And then I guess the last modifications were with the neckline. I added in the double knitting rows, same as in the cardigan number 9, because again, I was just afraid of this neckline stretching out over time because I wasn't sure how stable the mohair would be. And then because I was afraid of the mohair itching me, so I knit the ribbing. I picked up stitches, did my double knitting, and I knit the ribbing. And then when I knew that I wanted to fold it over, I switched to using a wool. So one of the yarns that I used in the yoke is Sandnes Garn Tin Silk Mohair in the color, I want to say it's Shocking Pink. And I happen to have the same exact color on their Sunday base. So I switched over from the mohair and I sized down my needles and I knit the rest of the ribbing in the pink. And then there was a certain point where I got tired of it, so I just switched over to stockinette because it's going to be folded in on the inside of the sweater. Literally nobody will be able to tell if it is stockinette or ribbing. So I switched over to stockinette, and then I did a very, very stretchy, Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. And then after I block it, I'm just going to sew it down, and the plan is to have a little bit of the pink pop through, and then it will coordinate with a little bit of the pink pop through, and then it will coordinate with the pink ribbing on the cuffs. And that is the saga of my Celeste sweater. Like I said, I still have to finish weaving in the ends on this and blocking it, so hopefully I will wear it in my next video or next knitting podcast, whatever the next video is. And the colorwork in this pattern is so easy to knit. I've actually knit this before. I knit the Celeste sweater Man for Christmas 2023 for my dad, and I just remember really enjoying the colorwork, and it was the exact same here. This is such beginner friendly colorwork. The only section where you have long floats is towards the end of the colorwork, but by then you've had so much experience already knitting this very simple colorwork. It's also such a great use of scraps. My one annoyance with the pattern was that Petite Knit doesn't list any yardages for the contrast color. She just states that every single size can make it with a 50-gram ball of pure Gint, which is what I think she knit hers in. But if you're using scraps, like, that's not really helpful, because less than 50 grams is like, I think one ball has 100 yards. So does that mean you need 10 yards? Does that mean you need 90 yards? Like, you don't know. So that was a little touch and go, but I made sure to measure how much yarn I had before and after, because I was using all scraps for my yoke, and I used less than 20 grams of each color. There were certain colors I think I used less than 10 grams. So you can check my Ravelry project notes, because I say like contrast color 1 / whatever color that was, and I wrote out how much yardage I used of that yarn in the yoke. So this is, if you want to knit a version where you are holding mohair double and you have a lot of mohair scraps like me, you can totally knit the yoke with all mohair scraps, and then you'll just have to buy enough yarn to knit the body. And even knitting the body, I used way less yarn than the pattern recommended, and I actually had a lot of people messaging me the same, that they ended up using way less yarn than expected. I'm fairly certain I used a little less than 1700 yards of mohair, but I was holding it double. So if I was holding it single stranded, that means I used less than 850 yards, and I knit a size large. I want to say the size large yardage recommended is around like 1,000 yards. So I did use significantly less yarn than recommended. Oh, and also I forgot to mention that I knit this in 2 weeks. I really like following the Kopi dolls on Instagram, and they do these series where they give themselves like a timeline and a project. They're like, can I knit this sweater in a week? Can I knit this sweater in 15 days, whatever. So I felt like I was kind of in a knitting slump. Like I had a bunch of these projects that were just lingering, and I really wanted to cast new stuff on, but I was stressed about my old stuff, yada yada yada. You know the story. So I decided to pick this project, and I gave myself a 2-week timeline, and I got it done fairly easily. I don't think I knit that much more than I usually do. It's just that I was much more focused than I usually am, because I wasn't spending time like contemplating other things or thinking of other projects or looking at other yarns and like all the other distractions I usually get when I'm knitting. I already knew like, okay, this is this day, this is how much I want to get done. I don't really need to do anything else with my knitting. I just pick it up and knit. So I definitely want to try doing more of these knitting challenges in the future. I actually would love to do one this month so I can get one more sweater out this winter. And yes, I will be weaving in the ends and blocking it and seaming up the underarm of the neckline. I will be wearing it. Oh, and then I didn't even talk about the mohairs I used in it. So let's talk about the contrast colors first, because these were all leftovers from other projects. The blue is the Rowan Kid Silk Haze, which I think is like one of my favorite mohairs. I really want to knit a whole sweater in this mohair so I can have like proper thoughts on it. And then the purple, I used the Lang Lace mohair, which coincidentally I think is the most expensive mohair, but my least favorite. Most expensive that I used in the sweater. It's $20 or $21 a ball. However, I did get it on clearance at my local yarn store for $5, so that's great. Yeah, I think that one's just a little bit scratchier. It has a higher silk content, so you would think it would be the opposite, but. And then the pink and the yellow were both Sandnes Garn Tynn Silk mohair, which I think is the mohair with the biggest like halo. You can really see it on the sleeve. I will insert a better picture because if I try to do that, the sun gets in the way, but you can really see the halo in the Tynn Silk mohair in comparison to the Kelbourne Woolens Harmony in the sleeve, which is kind of funny because I wouldn't think that the Tynn Silk mohair would have such a huge halo because it has like 15% wool in it. And then the main color that I used is Kelbourne Woolens Harmony, which was gifted to me from them with no strings attached, and it is quite a matte mohair. It actually quite reminds me of some Surreys that don't have the shininess that you get from mohair, but I also haven't blocked this yet, so I'm unsure how it will be in blocking. And I think it has the least halo out of all of the mohairs that I used in the sweater. But again, maybe that will change in blocking. And I will say it is quite soft. It has a pretty like dry feel to it, but I don't foresee myself having a problem wearing this next to skin. The only area that I tend to be sensitive is like around my neck, which is why I added in the merino. And that is that. That is the Celeste sweater. If you've never knit colorwork before and you don't feel like starting off with a smaller project, I totally think that the Celeste sweater could be a great beginner colorwork project because you're only doing colorwork in the yoke. There's no catching floats. There's no long floats. And I think this sweater is so beautiful because there's no bad color combinations. Like if you go on Ravelry and you look at people's project pages, there's no ugly version of this sweater. Every single color combination looks good. There's people who do high contrast versions, people who do low contrast versions, people who do colorful versions, people who do more monochromatic versions or neutral versions, and they all look so good. It's just such a great everybody sweater, I think. Like whatever your color preferences are, if you struggle with picking out colors, I really don't think you can go wrong with this sweater. And I do think if, again, you go on people's Ravelry project pages and you sort by most helpful project notes, there is somebody who kind of gives an overview of how you pick out colors if you are unsure about picking out colors. For me, I just had this specific color scheme in mind since when the pattern first came out, and I didn't overthink it. I saw that I had similar colors in my stash and I just went for it. I didn't really think of any color management. There are spots that are low contrast and there are spots that are high contrast in this yoke, and I think it just works. And here is the cost for my Celeste sweater, and technically my cost is $0 because the Harmony yarn was gifted to me from Kelbourne Woolens, and all of the contrast colors that I used in this sweater are all leftovers from other projects, so that cost was already attributed to those projects. However, if you were purchasing all new yarn and you wanted to use the same exact yarns I used, this is what the projected cost would be. Okay, and the last finished object. It is technically still on the needles, but that's just because I ran out of yarn to do the bind off, and I had to record this podcast before it gets dark. But the first thing I'm doing after I finish recording is finishing the bind off, because I really want this to be a finished object. So this is the Joha Loop sweater by Other Loops, and I knit it as a Christmas present for my dad. Alas, I finished it in December, and then he said that he wasn't happy 100% with the fit, so I said, okay, I will go back and make the adjustments that you would like. So I ended up ripping out the body to just under the sleeve separation, and I added in, I don't know if you can see on camera, but there's a bunch of stitch markers here where I did a bunch of body decreases to tighten the body, and now then I knit the ribbing, and now I just have to bind off and it will be fully done. This is another top down sweater, raglan construction. Color work is all knit in the round, only in the yoke. The color work is fairly simple. The only thing is I did have a few issues with the color work charts. Issue number one is that there's a different chart for the raglan stitches than the rest of the color work, and the first time I cast it on I didn't notice it, which is my fault. I should have read the whole pattern, because the color work chart for the yoke is on one page and then the color work chart for the raglan stitches is on a different page, and I completely missed that. Issue number two is the way that the chart is written. It looks like there would be increases in the middle of the sleeve. However, if you have knit a raglan before and you have read a color work chart before, you should be able to figure that out. But if you don't have that experience, I do think the chart could be a little confusing because of that. And then lastly is more of a minor thing. The chart is written in 2 different shades of gray. And just from like a readability perspective, I didn't love that. I wish it was just black and white or 2 different colors with more contrast, but like using a light gray and a mid-tone gray in a color work chart is not the best for visibility in my opinion. And like I said, the color work is fairly simple. There are just a few rows where you are knitting the background color mostly throughout the row, but because you have these contrast colors in the raglan stitches, you are basically carrying your contrast color all around the body, and you have to constantly be touching the floats on those rows and making sure that they don't peek through or they're not too tight. I think I did a pretty good job on it. I honestly forgot about that until I went to check my Ravelry project notes today, so I knew what to talk about when talking about this project, and I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen. And there are these purl stitch details along the sides of the body where you're supposed to go in then with a crochet hook, I think, and then add in, you're basically supposed to extend the color from the yoke into the body. I actually do think I inverted the way that the color work is done in the yoke. I don't remember, but I've decided I don't really feel like doing that. I'll ask my dad if he wants it. If he wants it, I will add it in, but I'm fairly certain he's not going to care, so I'm just going to let it be. maybe it would look nice with that editing. I'll see how I feel after I do the bind off and if I haven't packed away the contrast color yarn. So the yarn that I'm using for this project, the contrast color yarns I'm using are both leftovers from other projects. The white is a strand of the Patton's wool worsted yarn, which is a very, very affordable, non-superwash wool worsted weight that you can get at Michael's here in the US. And the Patent site, or the Yarnspiration site, has so many cool colors of this yarn, and I really wish that Michael's would sell them in person. But even like the colors that Michael's does sell, they have like a solid selection of neutrals, and I totally would see myself knitting a sweater in this wool only. I actually do think I have a sweater quantity of black somewhere of this, so maybe that will be a sweater for me at some point, because it's a really nice non-superwash wool. It does have a woolly feel, but I wouldn't say it's rustic or itchy. Just like a very standard plain non-superwash wool. And because like we're losing Joann's and Michael's doesn't really have that many natural fibers in their yarn selection. Like my local Michael's has three, I think 3 or 4, at least 3 aisles of yarn, and the majority of it is all acrylic, and I just wish they would increase their natural yarn selection. But I am happy that they sell this. And then I held it with a strand of the Drops Kid Silk Mohair in the white colorway. That was the one that I was telling you that I really do not enjoy, that I find it prickly, but because my dad always wears his sweaters over like button downs, it's completely fine. And he actually tried it on without the button down, and he didn't say it was itchy or anything. But I also think he's just used to wearing wool sweaters. And then the main color that I'm using for this sweater is Peace Fleece worsted in their Volga Zippy blue colorway. And if you watched any of my previous podcasts, you know that my experience with this wool has been a roller coaster ride. In the beginning, so when I was purchasing it, I was really, really excited. The yarn is sourced and milled in the US, and it is a 75% American wool, 25% mohair blend, and I want to say the mohair is grown by indigenous collectives. And it could be that the wool comes from indigenous collectives. I don't remember, but definitely some of the fiber is sourced from indigenous farms here in the US. And it's also milled here in the US, and it's a pretty reasonable price point. So the majority of this I did buy a few years ago, and I think at that time it was $15, but I had to buy an additional skein to finish it up, and it's $18, but I think $18 for 100 grams of US sourced and milled yarn is a very reasonable price point in my experience. And I really love the heathered look in the yarn. I love that you get a little bit of the mohair halo without having to buy a separate mohair yarn. However, the knitting experience isn't my favorite. I feel like it hurts my hands when I knit with this yarn. I don't know what it is about it, but it hurts my hands, especially when I'm doing ribbing and when I'm doing the color work. When I was just knitting plain continental knitting in the round with it, it was okay, but the ribbing and the color work was not the best. So I don't want to say I'm never going to use this yarn, because maybe I would just knit a pattern with it where I'm not doing color work and I don't have to knit ribbing. Like maybe I would knit a Metropolitan pullover by Toriu with this yarn, because that doesn't include color work, and I don't think there's any ribbing. There's just I-cord bind offs in that pattern, because like I said, I really love the way that this yarn is produced. I think they have beautiful colors. I really like the fabric. It's a nice rusticy warm wool. I'm not going to be purchasing any in the spring or summer anytime soon. Well, let's see how I feel next winter. And I already blocked it once, but because I frogged the yarn and then used that frogged yarn, I will be blocking it again. And oh yeah, the Peace Fleece just blocks out beautifully. It is so crisp. My stitches look so much more even and smooth after blocking it out. Oh, and then this is one of the sweaters that I was talking about where I cast on stitches for the underarm and then I went back and seamed it. So there is a seam at the underarm, and it's just so much cleaner than when I pick up stitches. There's no holes in the underarm on each side. And I love it. Once again, I forgot to calculate the cost in my project notes, so I'm coming in later and I will just have the project cost somewhere on the screen. Technically, the patterns and the drops are leftovers from other projects, so when I calculate my project cost, I include the cost for the whole ball of yarn, because technically I had to buy that ball of yarn to make the project. So whenever I'm using leftovers, I just consider the cost zero, because that cost has already gone into the initial project. Okay, those are the 3 sweaters that I finished in February, or I guess the last one I'm technically finishing it in March, whatever. And then I have 2 smaller finished objects. I'll go over the quicker one first. So here are my 2 small finished objects. Let's talk about these first. So these are a very, very basic pair of Afterthought heel socks. I knit them cuff down, and I actually knit one last year for Knitty Natty's sock week, and I knit like 75% of the sock in a day. And then I wanted to get it done for sock week, so like 1 week later I knit the rest of it. And then I think, yes, I was helping my brother move, so I cast it on. And then I also was visiting a family member at the hospital, who they are completely fine right now, but I just needed something easy to work on to take there. And yeah, I was able to knit the sock. I did follow a new to me Afterthought heel tutorial, because the tutorial that I used to follow is from a creator knitting podcast or whatever, who is MAGA, and I do not wish to support that. So I found a new pattern on Ravelry. It's a really, really great pattern. It's a free pattern, and I like that it has different options in it. Like, it gives you instructions for toe up and cuff down, and for the Afterthought heel tutorial, and I think some other parts of the pattern as well, there are photos that show you how to do each step, and like how to pick up the stitches and where to cut and all that stuff. So I really liked the pattern, and I would recommend it. And that's what I used to knit the second sock. Now, I really love the ease of knitting Afterthought heel socks. However, they do not fit me very well, so I will be gifting this pair to my mom. And this was my first sock where I did a 3x1 cuff, and I really like the way that it looks. It's still stretchy. I can still get it over my heel. So I think in the future I will be doing more 3x1 cuff socks. And the yarn / colorway that I used for this is Tiny Human Knits self-striping sock set in the colorway Ponyo. And it was a 50-gram set with a 20-gram contrast color, and I have just like the teensiest bit left of both of them. I did knit these socks longer than I usually would, because I wanted to use up the whole sock set. So when I was knitting the first sock, I was basically weighing the yarn, and when I got near the 25-gram point is when I knit the toe. And I tried my best to match them up. The stripes are maybe like 1 or 2 rows off. I think actually the stripes are exactly 1 row off, but I think functionally they look like the same. I would totally knit this pattern again, and I would purchase this sock yarn again. I really like Tiny Human Knits colorways, and I do want to knit more self-striping socks this year. I have some in stash, but I have a lot of like hand-dyed non-self-striping yarn in stash, so I have to knit some of that up before I can purchase more hand-dyed self-striping yarn. And then my other finished object is another gift knit, so that is why you will not be seeing it when it is 100% done on here, because I just want to bucket and give it away. So these are the Mondial mittens by Autumn and Indigo. They are knit cuff down as well, and they are a convertible pair of mittens. So let me try them on to show you. So here they are, and then you can open up the flap so you have use of your fingers, and then they have a really pretty cable design. I think I talked about some of my woes with this pattern in the last knitting podcast episode, so I'll try to keep it brief. Basically, I think there's too much information in certain parts of the pattern, and then not enough information in other parts of the pattern. And I didn't love the way that it's formatted, because let's say you start knitting on page 1, and then they're like, jump to page 4 for the next part of instruction, and then you knit there, then you jump back to page 1, but then the chart is on page 5. So basically, while I was knitting it, I constantly had to jump from one page, not constantly, but more than I would like. I would have to jump from one page to another to figure out like what I'm doing and what I have to do next. Then my biggest complaint is that there's only one chart in the pattern. Only the right mitten is charted. The left mitten is not charted. And it just says to like inverse the charts for the left mitten. And because you are increasing for the thumb in different sections for each mitten, I found that a little bit confusing, and I just wish there was a chart for the second mitten, especially because I think I said this last time, on the chart key there's like a sentence that's cut off. It's like the thumb on the left mitten is, and then it cuts off. It doesn't tell you where it goes. So when I had first started knitting it, the left mitten, I was doing the increases in the wrong spot, and then I realized, oh wait, no, it actually has to go here. And then the pattern has line by line what you have to do on each row for the cables, and personally I just find that unnecessary. Like if I'm knitting a cabled pattern, I prefer to read the chart, and I understand not everybody can read charts or wants to read charts, so I think it would have made sense if they maybe like wrote out what the cable rows are, but just having each row written out just seems kind of unnecessary for me when some of the more important information, in my opinion, was not included. Like the left mitten chart. I'm still a little salty about that. And then also, I don't think there was very clear instructions on how you seam up the mitten flap. So I've seen mitten flaps knit a few different ways. In this one, you put these stitches on hold for the mitten flap, and then you cast on stitches in the same row to make the top of the mitten flap, and then later on you basically have to seam the sides of the mitten flap so they don't like flop everywhere. And the instructions, in my opinion, are quite vague, so I wasn't 100% sure how to do it, and I just kind of like fiddled around and did it, and it's not the cleanest seam, so I'm unsure if I'm going to rip it out or not. I'm going to, I think, do the second mitten first, and if I'm able to figure out a cleaner way to do the second mitten, I will rip out the seaming on the first mitten. But all those complaints aside, I do think it makes a really, really cute pair of mittens, and because I understand like my struggle points on this first pair, I could see myself knitting this pair again. And I think I've been complaining a bit about mittens in my last few videos, but I wish that more paid mitten patterns came with multiple sizes. Like I think this pattern was like $7, $6 or $7, but it only comes with one size. Whereas if I'm purchasing a sweater pattern at that same price, it will usually come with a few sizes. So that is my beef with mitten patterns. But overall, I really liked it. Finished object, and I think my mom will like them as well. Oh, and I really, really liked the yarn that I used for this. I used Knitting for Olive Merino and Soft Silk Mohair, both in the colorway Bottle Green. I actually bought this yarn to make the sweater number 14. It's the My Favorite Things knitwear pattern that has the cables all over, and her sample is knit in like a clove green colorway. But I really, really liked this bottle green colorway. However, after knitting the mittens, I have since learned that this is perhaps not the best colorway for an all-over cabled sweater because the cables kind of get lost in this colorway. I do think you can knit cables in dark colors. It's just like certain colors and certain yarns work, and then certain yarns they just get lost in, and I do think this is one where it gets lost in. However, I will say I'm quite shocked. I'm not shocked. I'm quite surprised at how thin this yarn is knit together. Like, I would say this is a sport weight when knit together, but I feel like I've seen people knit DK weight sweaters with Knitting for Olive, Soft Silk Mohair, and Merino held together. And I don't know, I feel like I'm afraid it would be too airy for me. I wouldn't want the fabric to be see-through. If I'm comparing it to the Sandnes Garn Sunday and Tynn Silk Mohair, I feel like they give a thicker fabric than this. Is that just me? What do you think if you knit with this yarn combination? Because I know it's quite popular. And I actually only have one whip. That's wild. I don't think I've ever recorded a knitting podcast where I only have one whip. My singular whip is a test knit, my first test knit for 2025. It is the Avenue T by Toriu. So I'm fairly certain this has the same shaping as her Avenue vest, hence why the names are the same, but it also has the same shaping as her Metropolitan pullover, which I test knit last fall. So it has a contiguous sleeve construction. You start off knitting flat to shape the neckline and the shoulders, and then you join in the round and you work a contiguous sleeve construction similar to the Troxo sweater, which I am wearing today. And This is my first time making a fingering weight garment, and she did have a very, very generous testing time on. I think there was 8 weeks, possibly more than 8 weeks, and I cast on at the point where I would have 6 weeks. But because there were no sleeves, I thought that that would be okay. And I've actually, sorry, I see like some black fuzz or something on it. Okay, I'll get that out later. What was I saying? But yeah, so I cast this on when I had 6 weeks to knit it, and it doesn't look like much, but this is way further into the project than I was expecting. I think I'm on like my 5th day of knitting it, and I'm pretty far into the yoke. And if you've knit into US sleeve construction, you know that the yoke is a part where you will have the most stitches on your needles. And I'm knitting this with 3.5mm needles, and honestly at this point it doesn't feel that different from knitting with 4mm needles. Like, I think I will get this done easily within the 6 weeks, or I guess at this point like 5.5 weeks that I have left. 5.5 or 5, either way, 5 weeks. I think I could very easily get this done. It's such a nice mindless knit at this point. Even though I am still working the yoke increases, it has a really, really nice rhythm to it, and because it's so lightweight, I can walk and knit with it, which I cannot say for a lot of sweaters. It's like basically knitting on a really big sock, but it's even better than knitting on a sock because it's a large circumference. Yeah, overall, so it's just been, oh no, I dropped a stitch. Overall, it's just been a very, very enjoyable knit, and fingering weight garments are not as scary as I expected. I mean, I'm saying that at the point where I'm only knitting the yoke. Maybe, you know, in a few weeks in the future when I am on Body Island, I'm going to be ruining the day I decided to knit a fingering weight garment. I'm not there. At this point, I'm still absolutely loving the project, and I'm already like, I can knit another one. I have so much fingering weight yarn in my stash. I could totally knit another one. I think I could knit a version that has long sleeves so I could have a nice fingering weight long sleeve sweater. And this gauge is really, really nice. It's not holy, but it's not super tight either. And like I said, 3.5mm needles isn't really that different from 4mm needles. I'm recording this the day before daylight savings, and I am so looking forward to the days getting longer. But anyways, I adjusted my camera so hopefully it's a little bit brighter. What was I saying? The yarn that I'm using for this project is Northlight Fibers Spring Street. It is such a nice yarn. It comes in 70-gram hanks, fingering weight. I think there's like a little over 300 yards for each hank, and I have 4 of them. So I think technically if I wanted to, I could have knit a long sleeve tee, but because it's a test knit, I'm just going to be knitting it to pattern. Actually, I was thinking maybe shortening the sleeves a little bit, but I have to email Tori and ask her about that. We'll see how I feel at the point when I come to the sleeves. But yes, what I was saying, the yarn has such a nice hand feel. It is Northlight Fibers Spring Street. It is their fingering weight base. I think it comes in like 70-gram hanks. It is 100% Falklands merino, and it's so soft. Like, it is some of the softest wool that I have used. Sadly, it's also a discontinued yarn because Northlight Fibers has closed down. I think they closed down either last year or the year before. And I bought this yarn from one of my local yarn stores. I don't remember. It might have been, I might have bought it in a yarn store in Brooklyn. Woolen, I think. They had, I think when Northlight Fibers announced that they were closing down, a lot of the stores near me were clearancing out the yarn, so I took advantage and I bought a sweater quantity, and I had just been saving it for the perfect project, and I really think this is a perfect project. My first fingering weight sweater, and I think because I love this yarn so much, it's keeping me motivated to work on the project, and I think it'll be a nice transitional piece. Like, I don't foresee myself wearing a wool t-shirt when it's like 80 degrees and 80% humidity, but in the cooler days of summer, or maybe as a summer layering piece at night when it's a little bit cooler, I totally see myself wearing this. Or even I can wear it when it's cold outside, layered underneath a cardigan. I am unsure how hot I will be wearing this hot pink color. I do kind of have an idea of wearing it with like a white maxi skirt. That could be a vibe. But either way, that is my one singular whip. Loving the pattern, loving the yarn, just enjoying it overall. But I don't think it will be my solo project for long. I just wanted to get it cast on and started and at a point where I could knit it without really like constantly reading the pattern, because I know it is a project that is going to take me quite some time. But now that I know it's moving along so much quicker than expected, I feel comfortable casting on some other projects. Because I have the yarn out, I will just share it. This is the Northlight Fibers Spring Street, and it's the color Rose Campion. You can just see how bright and punchy this color is. I also think it's pretty rare to get non-superwash yarns that are this bright and neon-y. So with that, let's get into acquisitions because I have yarn for a second test knit. Okay, so my first acquisition was gifted from a Woolfolk and Tux Knit. She is having a test knit for her Mia hood. It is a beautiful brioche hood scarf, and I've been wearing the heck out of my Sophie hood. So when she asked me if I wanted a test knit, I was like, hell yes, I do. Totally want another hooded scarf in my life, and the yarn was very kindly gifted for the test knit. This is Woolfolk Luft. It is a bulky weight yarn, and it is a cotton wool blend. 55% Ovis 21 Ultimate Merino and 45% Pima cotton. So it has a chain neck construction. So the core is cotton, and I'm pretty sure then the merino is blown into it. So you have a very lightweight, fluffy, super soft yarn. And I've never knit brioche before, but I've always loved the look of the texture. I've just been a little bit intimidated by it, but I think this is the perfect project to give it a go. And after I finish up the bind off on my dad's sweater, my 4.5mm needles will be free, and this will be cast on tonight. I'm so looking forward to knitting it up. And hopefully that will be a finished object next episode. And the colorway for this is L16. It has like it looks like it has a black core. The cotton is a black, and then the merino is a brown color. It's very, very pretty. I had the yarn score of a lifetime. Okay, not of a lifetime. My best yarn score for 2025. A sweater quantity of Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino for 40% off. And I'm very much still in my chocolate brown era, as you can see. Two of the sweaters that I finished for myself, chocolate brown. The Woolfolk colorway that I picked out, chocolate brown. This is not a chocolate brown, but it's pretty close. It's the color cognac, I think. Let me pull out cheese or a skein. So I got a sweater quantity of Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino in Lease Cognac. I think dark cognac is the colorway. So the story goes, how does the story go? Oh yeah, so I was driving up north to visit the yarn store that sells the drop skid silk mohair to compare the current dye lot to my current dye lot. No, to compare the current dye lot to my old dye lot. And on the way, there's another store up in northern New Jersey called Knit Tapestry. I feel like I talk about them quite a few times because I really enjoy their yarn curation, and that weekend they just happened to be having a yarn sale. So I thought I would just stop by and see what's on sale. I didn't really have any plans of buying anything, but then I saw that they had several sweater quantities of Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino on sale for 40% off. So they have their yarn sales a few times a year. Their next yarn sale will be during the New Jersey Wool Walk, which happens at the end of April. They have some of the best sales. They have a huge table in their store, and whenever they have the sale, like everything on the table is 40% off. And like I said, I already enjoy their yarn curation, so I probably knew, but I didn't want to admit that I knew that I would find something that I like, because every time I've gone to this sale, I end up coming home with something. Actually, the yarn from my cardigan number 9, the Manchelopis, I bought during their last sale in September. And I think Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, and just Knitting for Olive in general, the price kind of fluctuates depending on where you purchase it from. Even like stores in the US, some places it's $10, some places it's $12. I'm fairly certain that Knit Tapestry was selling it for $10 because I was able to get 11 skeins for $60, which is a great price for a very, very nice yarn. I've never knit with their heavy merino. I have heard people say that it's not as soft as a merino, but I'm okay with that. Like I said, I like woolly wool, I like rustic wools, and I wouldn't say this is a woolly wool at all. it still feels quite soft in my opinion. I haven't decided what I'm going to knit with it, but I have quite a lot of yardage, so I have quite a few pattern ideas in mind. Like, how could I resist a sweater quantity of this at 40% off? I'm still just kind of waiting for the price of yarn to skyrocket with this whole tariff war situation we have going on, so whenever I can find a good deal on yarn, I'm not going to regret it, because who knows where we'll be in 6 months to a year. But when I went to the yarn store to look for the drops kid silk mohair, I didn't end up buying the drops mohair because, like I said, the dye lot was completely different. And I was like, I drove all the way up here, I need to buy something. Like, I need my trip to have been worth it. So I ended up getting 2 balls of Lang Jia wool, and technically I think at their store it's $7 or $7.50, and everywhere else this yarn is $11 to $12. So it's kind of like I got it on a sale, and I'm excited to knit this because I've heard great things about it. I love that it comes with a little nylon reinforcement thingy that is in the center of the skein that I haven't pulled out yet. And I got, they don't have the names of the colorways, oh, I'll write them on the screen somewhere. I want to say this is cobalt, and this is like butter or sunshine, something like that, or daffodil. This is like my college colors, but I'm not going to be knitting them together. I kind of just want to knit very plain socks with these. I actually have an idea for an intarsia sock with this blue one, so we'll see what happens if that comes to fruition. Then I do have one last yarn acquisition, which is another sock yarn. So if you're not in the US, you may not know the whole saga of Joann's. Basically, they were closing down some stores, and some stores were staying open, and then they went into a bidding war, and ultimately the company that won the bid decided to go into liquidation and close out all Joann's stores. So I think like that was announced, or that was known either Sunday or Monday. So I ended up going to Joann's that day or the day after to basically just stock up on thread, because the Gutermann thread there is so much cheaper than purchasing it at my local clothing stores, and Michaels just doesn't even sell it. Their thread selection at my local Michaels is so minimal. I'm so sad that I'm going to be missing out on Joann's. Anyways, while I was purchasing the thread, they used to have a coupon, Rep Joann's, where if you did an online order pickup in store, they would email you a $5 off $10 coupon, and I always have to use that coupon. So I just got 2 more skeins of this patent Croy socks in the Midnight Orchid colorway. I think I had 2 other skeins of this in my last knitting podcast as an acquisition, but I'm not mad about it because I don't know where I would get this colorway otherwise. I would have to order it online and pay $10 shipping, which I'm not about to do. And I really, really like this colorway. Self-striping colorway, and on Ravelry, there are people who have knit socks with it, but there's also people who have knit mittens with it, and it looks so cute. So I'm not mad about having 4 of these in stash. Okay, so that is all of the yarny talk. If that's all you're here for, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again next time, and happy knitting. If you want to hear me talk about books / a singular TV show, I think I only have one TV show. If you want to hear me talk about books / what I've been watching this month while knitting, you can keep watching. So for books, I think last time I was talking about the Agatha Raisin series, and I gave up on that. I think I made it to book 5, but I was just like, I'm over it. The main character, Agatha Raisin, is so whiny. She is a 50-year-old woman, but her inner monologue is that of a 15-year-old. And she's supposed to be like so strong and confident and, you know, really business savvy and all this stuff. But there's this like one guy that she likes, and their back and forth is so irritating to me. Like, it's giving high school. It's not giving mature 50-year-old woman, which she is. Like, she self-describes herself that way. And when I got to the 5th book, I was like, I'm over it. And the way that the books are written, like a lot of the social nuances and stuff, when I first started reading them, I thought they were written in like the 60s or the 50s or whatever, because they, like, the wording and like the way that they treat people of color, queer characters, all that stuff just felt very outdated to me. And then I find out they're actually written in the 90s. A little bit mind blown about that. Anywho, I just gave up on the series. Maybe I'll go back to it in the future when I'm really desperate for something to read, but at the moment I was like, I give up. And then I went into a little bit of a reading slump, and I started a new series, which I also ended up DNFing. I think it's the Witch Collector series. I made it about 50% way through the book, and I asked on Instagram, like, if you have read the series, if you have read this book, does it get any better? And people were like, no. And the people who forced themselves to finish the first book, they ended up giving up in the second book. I'm like, okay, I'm just giving up now. I don't really care. So that's what I read last month. I did just get the new Ali Hazelwood book from on Libby. It just came in. So I will be starting that this weekend, which is exciting. And I did ask on Instagram for some book recommendations, and people really came through. So I do have some things that I'm looking forward to reading now this month. And then as far as like TV shows goes, I started watching Deal or No Deal Island because every time I watched The Traitors, it would start autoplaying, and then finally one day I kind of just gave up because I was really into my knitting project, I think, and I'm like, I don't feel like changing the app or whatever. Let's just see what this TV show is about. And it's kind of silly, but it's also kind of fun. And also, I didn't watch season 1. I started watching season 2 because that was what was autoplaying, and Parvati is on it, and I already really liked Parvati from season 2 of The Traitors, so I'm like, okay, I'll watch it for Parvati, and then I ended up just getting hooked in. The premise of the show is kind of silly, like the whole show is kind of silly. It is very much one of those reality TV shows that if you ever watched 30 Rock, they would always come up with these absolutely ridiculous, like spoofy reality TV shows, and then it just turns out 10 years later there are real shows like that. One of the shows that was really, they had a whole episode about it, it was really funny, or it was like reoccurring through a season. It was called MILF Island, and I'm fairly certain there was a reality TV show that was exactly like that last year. So yeah, but I'm not doing a very good job explaining this, but basically there's like competitions in the first half of the show, and then in the second half of the show they play Deal or No Deal to add money to like a large community pot, and then whoever is there at the end of the season will play the last game of Deal or No Deal, and one of the like potential briefcases will have that community pot that they all built up throughout the season. And then there's like a lot of like interpersonal things because at the end of each episode, the person who plays Deal or No Deal either goes home or picks somebody else to go home. So there's like some light-hearted drama in it, and it's a cast of mixed newbies, and there's 2 or 3 people who are from other reality TV shows, like competition reality TV shows. And then obviously I have to talk about The Traitors. If you don't want Traitor spoilers, stop watching now. Just skip this chapter. You can either leave the video because it's really the end afterwards, or you can just watch my outro. So Traitors season 3 USA finale. I was happy to see Danielle go because I did find her annoying. I don't think she deserves all the hate that she's getting online. Like, I'm not going to be around here spreading hate, but I did find her game annoying. And as a Caroline fan, obviously I was anti-Danielle. I didn't like the way that she went after Caroline. And I'm not saying Caroline was perfect, but I do think her game was sabotaged by Danielle. So I was happy that she did not go to the end. However, I was not very satisfied with the finale because why are Ira and Dolores there? They did nothing. I think in the reunion they said Dolores voted incorrectly like 8 out of 9 times or something like that. Absolutely ridiculous. She did not contribute much to the game, but at least she contributed something. Like, she was really, really vehemently wrong a lot of the times, but at least there was some entertainment there. But Ivar, in the words of Gaggy, is he even in the room? Why was he there? I really wish my ideal closing scenario would have been them voting out Ivar, and then somebody getting the power of the seer and getting out Danielle, and then in the end, I honestly wouldn't have cared if the Traitors won under Brittany. That would have been fine with me, or if they would have gotten rid of Brittany at the fire pit and the Faithful still would have won. I just didn't, the 2 people that I didn't want to win the most was number 1, Lord Ivar, and number 2, Danielle. The reason I didn't want Lord Ivar to win is 1, because he literally contributed nothing. He was just there. And 2nd, I since learned from TikTok that apparently he worked for the company that owned Cambridge Analytical Scandal, which I don't really want to get into all the nuances of that, but you can search them up on Wikipedia. And he was like the director of the company. They did a lot of like election interference stuff and data collection, and they had a huge impact on the 2016 election. And it's not only and Brexit, and I think also was it President Duarte in the Philippines. Like, they are responsible for some really ghoulish behavior, and he is like the director of the company that owns it. So after I learned about that, I'm like, I am not rooting for this man. I mean, I wasn't rooting for him from the beginning because I'm not into the royals, and when I first learned that was his claim to fame, I was already rooting against him in the beginning. When I heard this, I was like, I absolutely do not want this man to win. Then for him to win after contributing nothing and being a total ghoul in real life, it kind of just ruined it for me. That said, overall I really enjoyed the season, and I think this was my favorite season that I've watched. Now that this season is over, I am going to go ahead and watch UK seasons 2 and 3. I think part of the reason I didn't watch season 2 is sometimes it feels more real watching real people watch it because they have legitimate reasons for really wanting and needing the money. Like, I remember in season 1, like, people have sick parents, or they have debts, or they want to further their education, or they want to get a house, and so it feels more personal when they're rooted out, or like a traitor knows that they're innocent and they're going after them, versus the US version feels very, very low stakes because these are all reality TV people. They all have some sort of wealth. They're being paid some sort of significant, I'm assuming, appearance fee to be on the TV show. Like, the money that they're getting from the game isn't life or death to them in the same way that it is for an average person. So yeah, I feel like just mentally watching the show with reality TV people is just much more low stakes. And then when I'm watching it with the real people, like, I don't know, I just get more emotionally invested because I feel for them more. That is the highlights of what I've been watching. I think Severance, I'm a few episodes behind. I don't know. I feel like the season has just been a little bit boring. I don't know if that's like a controversial take. Abbott Elementary is still absolutely loving, but I also might be a few episodes behind. There's like a new show on NBC/Peacock that I want to watch that is like a murder mystery club, which is like one of my favorite genres of books. So I'll be watching that. Maybe I'll talk about that in the next episode. But that is the end of this episode. If you watched through all my rambling, I really feel out of practice, even though it's only been a month since I recorded my last podcast episode. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I would love to know what is on your needles while watching this video because I'm nosy and I love to know what other people are working on. I've also been posting more knitting stuff on TikTok. I feel like with Instagram, I just can't help but be a little bit more regimented. Like, I'm always thinking about what I'm posting, whereas ideally on TikTok, I just want it to be more casual, and it'll be knitting stuff, self-care stuff. I want to share more about like the books I'm reading and stuff. So if you want to follow me over there, I didn't create a new account for that. So my handle on there is Charm Toaster. And obviously, like, my Instagram and Ravelry wish list are always linked below in the description box. But I figured I'd just shout out the TikTok because I've never shared that before. And I haven't been posting on it in like over a year. But I brought it back last month actually because of the Celeste sweater, because I wanted to talk about it there. Hopefully that's like transitioning me into making it a more casual space, because I like the idea of having a space where I don't have to plan about what I'm going to post or talk about, where I can just post whatever. I'm not 100% there yet, but it's a process. What did I say? If you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and follow. Truly the end of my rambling and the end of this episode. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Happy knitting. Hope to see you again next time. Bye.